one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, and let the roll reflect that all council members are present and a quorum has been established. Council members, are there any corrections to the September 19th meeting? Okay. For the public comments, we have options for comments to be made to the city council. For the emailed comments, they have been forwarded to the city council and their receipt is acknowledged. Please recognize that items not on the agenda will not be discussed this evening. For live comments, they may be either through Zoom or in person. We ask that attendees either raise their hand in person or use the raised hand feature in Zoom, and they will be invited to speak one at a time. I also want to remind everyone that the public comment period is not intended for an extended dialogue. Is there anyone who would like to address the council at this time? Anyone on Zoom? Okay. Council members, are there any council items to be considered? Okay. Council, I would accept a motion to accept the consent agenda. Okay. Okay. Discussion? All those in favor of the motion state by saying aye. Aye. Opposed to that motion state by saying nay. And that motion prevails. Tonight under Parks and Rec, we have with us Paige Marshall Bigler to give us a review of the summer recreation program. Welcome, Paige.
Well, good evening, council members and mayor. I'm happy to be here this evening presenting in front of a full council. Short and sweet this evening, a brief overview of our season at Levee Park Rotary Pavilion. We just wrapped up a few short weeks ago. This year, new promotional platforms were undertaken, including large kiosk displays for people visiting downtown, enhanced use of social media strategies and channels, and our own, and in collaboration with the entertainment that was booked in partner organizations, and targeted social media advertising campaigns to draw in people who may not have known or attended in years past. These events help drive tourism to the city by bringing people from surrounding areas to experience Hastings. Messaging for the activities often includes information encouraging people attending to dine in or take out at one of our local restaurants here in Hastings. Additionally, this year, music and markets promotion was launched to co-promote the Makers Alleyway Markets and Music in the Park series, and plans are in the works to expand those offers next year. Similar to previous years, we utilized communications platforms online and with our local media partners. Calendars were also distributed to local businesses and organizations and featured in the Rivertown newsletter. And to date, the top two ways people hear about our events is through social media and our Rivertown newsletter, the third being word of mouth. Over 8,300 people attended our programming at the Rotary Pavilion this summer. Attendance varies depending on the weather, the type of programming that we have down at Levee Park. This year we had 4 cancellations due to weather forecasts, but we continue to grow in attendance. We offered 7 different types of program series this summer. New this year, we started our Rec Art Police program series. So we did our kickoff at Levee Park, and then we went to 5 different locations. We saw over 500 youth, and we were gearing it towards preteens. This was a partnership with our Hastings Police Department, our Community Engagement Officer, Whitney Ranowski, as well as some awesome sponsors such as SC Toys, Country Financial, and other organizations that helped us make this possible. I continue to apply for grants and build partnerships with organizations. However, we did not receive funding from the Metro Regional Arts Council in either grant cycles this year or the Minnesota State Arts Board. But we have applied for 2023, and we hope to increase our funding sources for next season. Another way Levee Park is utilized is through our park rentals. This year we had 43 rentals at Levee Park, very similar to last year and the increase from previous years. And our parks team works really hard daily with that maintenance and upkeep at Levee Park, preparing for those rentals. And I want to express my appreciation to our program partners, our sponsors, our community who continue to show interest to have these offerings at Levee Park. And I thank you, Mayor and City Council, for your continued support for these programs in Hastings. And at this time, I can stand for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Paige. And Councilmember Lund.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thanks, Paige. You said that we didn't get any grants, but we're applying again. I'm just curious if you could tell us what the criteria are for some of these, and then what programming is more favored and tends to get those grants, and what.
Absolutely.
Whatnot.
So Metro Regional Arts Council, I applied in 2020 for a 2021 funding, as well as 2021 for 2022. We received that funding in 2020, so that was a $15,000 grant to go towards our Performance in the Park series, so like theater and dance and art, and the grant cycles is twice a year, in August and then again in November. So I applied to both of those. We didn't receive funding. The criteria was the same. The Metro Regional Arts Council experienced a 200% increase in their applicants that they received. So I imagine that's probably why, one of the reasons we didn't receive the $15,000 funding. So I applied for the first cycle, and we'll hear in November if we received $15,000 for our performance series for 2023.
Councilmember Liefeld.
Thank you. Paige, even though I was giving you a hard time for your recap this time of the year being the end of summer, I love this time of year because these events are so amazing. I come down there, I love seeing people from all over the place, people I don't know. That's always, we joke about it, all of us around here, that when we can go somewhere and it's like, I didn't know hardly any of those people. That's an awesome thing. And just the variety that you give the community down there. And I know you've taken, not really requests, but people will give you ideas, and you're always looking for ideas and ways to include more of our community, and every year you just do it, and I just want to say thank you. You are just awesome at this, and I don't know what I'd do with my summer if you weren't down there having all of these awesome events, so thank you.
Thank you,
Yeah, keep it
Councilmember
up.
Liefeld. And a little testament to our program series. We did do surveys for the first 5 years to kind of shape our program series to see what the community wanted, what visitors wanted. And really with our additional outside funding, we're really able to expand our offerings, higher quality caliber of performances down at Levee Park.
Councilmember Fox.
Thank you, Your Honor. Paige, thank you for all your hard work. I would like to echo some of the comments of Councilmember Liefeld and add that I had the pleasure of working at some of the Makers Alleyway markets and watching the hordes of people flock down to the pavilion just to see the performances in the park is just an exceptional addition to the Rotary Pavilion. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councilmember Fox.
And I will too express thank you because, I go to them all the time, and it's so fun to see the various, age levels of people that are there and the families, and they continue to come every week. So the variety that you've been choosing, and you work a year in advance on this, you probably start now for next year, or you've started earlier, so I appreciate that. But two, I just want to express a thank you to the sponsors that do help us with this program, because we really you couldn't do your job without their assistance too. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Vaughn.
Thank you. Paige, do we still do the brick program? Can people purchase a brick down there?
Yes, our paver program
Yeah,
is a
and
part
does-
of.
Does that go to a specific account? Does that go for operation? My concern is she's showing how much it's getting used, and she's mentioning how staff is trying to keep up with what it is. Sooner or later, we're gonna have to invest in this place to keep it alive and keep it even more thriving and more opportunities. I just think that we should find a dedicated funding source if it's a paper program, or if somebody wants to say, I want this to go back to it. how do we get that funding source? And I think that would be important for Paige and the staff to have that resource, so they don't have to worry about getting into a budget cycle saying the thing's starting to dilapidate a little bit. So just my 2 cents. So I hope the program goes, but maybe it's time to push that paper program again. For people that are enjoying these series, for example, may say, how do we continue this? How do we keep this place the way it is, as an example? Thank you.
Good point. Thank you, Councilmember Vaughn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you again. Community development, tonight, Sweet Living of Hastings at the southeast corner of 33rd and Vermillion Street. And for this item, we have Economic Development Director, John Hinsman. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council members. I'm going to pull up a presentation here of what we're looking at tonight. Got a few actions related to the same piece of property here, which is located in the southeast corner of 33rd Street and Vermillion. The activity that's proposed is to construct Sweet Living, which is a 32-unit assisted living facility providing memory care and assisted living units. With this, there's a couple of land use actions that there are to consider. One would be a comprehensive plan amendment, a rezoning, preliminary and final plat, and site plan. And I'll go through those individually here in a moment. We did have our advisory commissions take a look at this. Our planning commission reviewed this a couple of weeks ago, recommended approval of all actions on a 3-2 vote. We did have one letter that was submitted as part of the application from a neighbor from Terry's Hardware with some questions about the change in land use from residential to commercial on that property. But ultimately, the Planning Commission itself did recommend approval of it. With the plat on the property, we do have park dedication that is part of that. Our Park and Recreation Commission did review that application and recommended that cash in lieu of land be paid for that. So the actions we have tonight are as follows. We have a comprehensive plan amendment. We're looking at amending the comprehensive plan, changing that from commercial to medium residential. So this shows the property here, 33rd Street and Vermillion Street. So neighbors of the property, Terry's Hardware over to the east. You got Preauthorization Rental to the north of the property. Over here in this dashed area is the recently approved apartment buildings for Enclave, 211 apartment units. And then to the south of it, you got Dugarrels with residential across the street. So during our comprehensive plan, we looked at this property as being commercial. The amendment tonight would be to change this to what's termed a medium residential designation, which is consistent with the designation of the apartment building that Enclave had, which is kitty corner to the southeast of the development. When you take a look at the comprehensive plan, we also have the Vermillion Street plan as well. The Vermillion Street plan, as you know, put together guide plans and visions for different areas along Vermillion Street. And specifically within this area, the red area represents what we had visioned in that document, which was residential. It showed here about a 4-story residential building with commercial along Vermillion Street. So that is part of our Vermillion Street plan. And so when we look at the comprehensive plan, we are recommending approval of it. Doing more detailed work on the Vermillion Street plan, we recommend that this change take place here. Along with the comprehensive plan is a rezoning. We're rezoning the property from what's termed commercial, C4 commercial, which is regional shopping center, which is the same as the Coburn's area, to a R4 high-density residence, which is the same as the Enclave area. So that is the proposal that we have before us tonight on that. Similar rationale behind that, our Vermillion. I didn't understand. I don't care if you didn't understand that. You all understood that, I'm sure. But it consistent with the comprehensive plan. So that's what we have before us tonight, is that recommendation for approval on this to change that land use. The plat on this is very simple. The plat is the reason the plat comes about is it was platted as an outlot, which cannot be developed, so we're basically taking the lot as is and changing it from an outlot to what's termed a lot of record. Preliminary plat and final plat are similar, so really no real changes there. Easements are fine on it, no public infrastructure within it. Does trigger the public dedication requirement for parkland, which is part of the recommendation for approval. So getting more into the nuts and bolts of this is the site plan itself. So 33rd Street comes to the north, singular entrance coming off of 33rd Street here, which lines up with Pro Power. Parking area for 25 spaces, which is similar to other proposals that Sweet Living has done. and then the building itself, which is kind of a L-shaped building located here on the property. Highway 61 over to the west, Terry's Hardware over to the east. This is the driveway that that accesses the new enclave area with Dugueros just to the south of that. Looking at landscaping, landscaping is fine for the property, meets our requirements for landscaping and separation. View of the building looks something like this, does meet our architectural requirements, has more of a residential look to it with a lot of different gables and variations in materials between brick and hardy plank siding on the building itself. So that's what it would look like on the outside of it. A little closer view of what we have here. So we are recommending approval of the site plan, plat, rezoning, and comprehensive plan amendment as proposed tonight. We do have representatives of Sweet Living here if you have any questions for them, and I could stand for any questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Councilmember Liefeld.
Thank you, Your Honor. John, if you could go back to the screen of I think it was the Vermillion corridor. Okay, so when I was looking at this in my packet earlier, so that image to the right, so on our original Vermillion corridor plan, this was already being looked at as residential?
Correct.
Okay, you've answered pretty much every question I had. Because I understood that this was a commercial use going forward in our Vermillion corridor plan. So I was concerned at us, moving off of that idea. So I have absolutely no questions. Thanks, John.
Yeah, thank you.
Councilmember Vaughn.
Thank you. John, I got a question on zoning. When we say it's residential, what determines it? I mean, this is a commercial business providing a service of residential care. Has any other community looked at it different? Is it always been residential if somebody lives there? Is that what the community development 101 is on zoning?
Council member, it's an interesting question. I mean, when you take a look at the clientele here, I mean, they're more institutional type residents. You've got memory care, which are not leaving for the most part, and dependent care, which have very limited mobility within it. Could that be a commercial use? Perhaps in some communities it may be considered a commercial use. In our zoning code, it's a permitted use under the residential district itself. When we take a look at the parameters of this property and its proximity to commercial areas, if this was more of a townhome type development, having the change here, I might be of a question because you have an existing commercial development. Being more of I would term this more of an institutional type of use than a pure residential use. I don't think you have as much of the issues of nonconformity that would come up because of the residents and being in the building as opposed to being more of a residential nature.
So to conclude, it's our measure of residential versus commercial. It's in our ordinance. Is that the right?
It is, yep. Under our zoning code, this type of use would be allowed under the residential district. It doesn't really contemplate it under the commercial.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Vaughn. Councilmember Lund.
Thank you, Your Honor. Councilmember Vaughn brings up an interesting question. You do, I think, often see a property like this in more of a commercial setting. It's not uncommon, so it's kind of interesting that. Councilmember Liefeld asked about the corridor plan. I'm just curious, for educational purposes, why do we not proactively look to modify and update our zoning based on that plan? And should we be looking to do that going forward?
Yeah, when we take a look at plans like the comprehensive plan or a plan like Vermillion Street, those are plans in which we are looking at future land uses. And so typically, we don't do that proactively. We wait for a development to come forward. We judge that development capacity as to whether this is something that would be consistent with the plan that we have and other rules or ordinances that we have in place. It provides us, I think, more of an ability to discern on development if we wait for the development to come as opposed to doing it before.
Follow-up question. Thank you, Your Honor. So it is reasonable, though, that we are sort of advertising it by virtue of our corridor plan, that this is, we are looking for a suitor, or we're willing to accept a suitor for this property. That would be this zone change versus, you said wait for somebody to come to us, but, and although that's true, we're not, necessarily, we weren't knocking on a door per se, but I would say that anything that's on this document is a clear indication of what the intent of this council would be for that property, correct?
I would agree with that. I mean, when we set out to do the Vermillion Street corridor plan, the question we wanted to answer with that was, if a developer was to come forward and ask, what is the city looking for on this piece of property? This is what we can show them. So I think it clearly does show an intent and a goodwill towards doing something consistent with it, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Lund. Any other questions, council? Councilmember Fulch.
Thank you, Your Honor. The owner of Terry's Hardware did, bring forward a letter, and I thought he had very valid points that were within his letter, and Councilmember Vaughn was, trying to ask, pertinent questions to address some of that. But I was curious, did you ever have a conversation with him yourself to talk through his concerns? I was just curious.
Yeah, I did speak with Chuck Terry on the phone a couple of times around the time the letter was submitted on it. And I understand when you look at the property here, and it's on Vermillion Street, it's on 33rd Street, it's at a cross-section in a commercial district, that there may be some questions as to why that this property should be designated to something else. So I understand that concern of it. Looking at the type of use here and the potential for it to be detrimental to his commercial use, I find that quite limited, because the use itself is not, I don't know what the word would be, strictly residential, like a townhome development in which you would have neighbors and backyards and more people with highly sensitive concerns about commercial activity and loading and other things which come with commercial districts. It's kind of interesting in these type of developments here, those are actually a positive to the citizens that are living in here. The activity, they like to see the activity within there, as opposed to others that might find it disturbing. So I think from a detrimental standpoint, I understand his argument. I don't know if I'm quite there with it myself. I could see this property here having the capacity for commercial, or this type of use as residential. And with this proposal coming forward and taking a look at our Vermillion Street plan, we had contemplated residential for the property.
Right. Well, thank you for having those conversations with him. I wish there was something more we can do. The fact of the matter is that this particular plot of land has been available for sale for such a long period of time, and it's exciting that a really valid proposal is being brought forward. Something that we really do need within our community is this kind of development for our seniors, and so I think that it makes a lot of sense. I would just ask, John, as we're moving forward with the development of the townhomes that are going to be in the center part of it there, on the other side of Terry's and behind, just for us to be, really conscious and thoughtful about how that approach looks from the frontage road, because I can see concern about not wanting it to, for Terry's to look strange, as, that it doesn't blend into the rest of the neighborhood. And I'm really concerned with, the Fleet Farm coming into town. And so I think that it's very, it's sensitive, for us to be conscious about Terry's, and I'd love to see them to stay. I think they have the best service in our entire community that they provide, and so just to recognize that the contributions that they do bring to our community and that we do value them. And so thank you for having those conversations. Sure. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Fulch. Councilmember Brox.
Thank you, John. My question revolves a little bit more around the idea of mixed use. And I don't want to use that term incorrectly because I realize there's specific zoning that relates to mixed use property, and that's not what we're talking about here. But one of the interesting things that I was thinking about as I was reading the letter from Chuck and Pete Terry was their proposal that commercial property thrives when other commercial property is next door to it. As a person who doesn't have an urban planning degree, logically to me, having residential and commercial mixed together seems like it would be a better situation for both the residents and the businesses. Can you just speak to maybe the evolution of strategy on land planning over time? Because it seems like to me in the past it was about segregating single-family homes, you know, public land, and they were very segregated things, whereas what I saw in the Vermillion Street corridor plan was a mixed-use plan where there was retail and residential on the main street. That's a much different concept. So to me, that's an evolution in like our planning for the city of Hastings, is that we're going that direction. So maybe, you know, can you just kind of, maybe I'm wrong about that, but my sense was the more mixture of zoning together is something that has maybe historically not been a planning approach in the past, but as we move into the future, as properties and businesses are next to each other and residences, is that something that we see more of into the future, or is that something that you think is just a trend? I mean, does that question make sense to you?
Sure. It comes down to a couple of different things. I mean, zoning originated to keep uses that were not compatible with one another away. It kind of went too far, frankly, in some aspects of it where, you know, obviously you don't want to live next to a giant belching, polluting factory, but to live next to a corner store, maybe that's not too bad of a thing, being residential and commercial next door. So getting away from that a little bit, but there's still certain uses that just don't fit well next to others from a residential or a commercial industrial standpoint. You know, if I'm looking at it purely from a commercial standpoint as a business owner, you're going to want things to drive traffic. The things that drive traffic may be other business trips that are surrounding it, that if I go to Coburn's, I may want to stop at the hardware store. Or it might be a situation in which I have more of a density of residential. If I've got 211 apartment units, or I've got another residential subdivision down the road, they're going to need things from a hardware store. If I'm visible, great. People will know that I'm there. So kind of a couple of different things that come into play there. So, you know, as long as the activities aren't going to be detrimental to one another, like I think if we had a townhome residential area there in which we had backyards and you've got truck traffic with the commercial, might not work so well. But with this type of facility, the ability or the opportunity for people to have these type of detrimental occurrences is much, much less.
Can I follow up?
Sure.
So, as a corollary to that, do you see any merit to the argument that it would be detrimental to property values to have residences next to commercial property and one being better than the other for the business value?
It's difficult to say. It really depends on really what would be developed on that property. You know, if it would depend on what type of commercial would be developed there. I mean, if a different type of commercial was to develop, you know, perhaps it would have a higher value on it. I don't know what that would do to Terry's Hardware as far as an effect on their property itself. I think more from the standpoint, property values are affected by negative attributes of surrounding areas than the opposite, in which you've got a higher valued area that would really transform that value to the neighboring property.
Thank you, that makes sense to me.
Thank you, Councilmember Brox. Councilmember Vaughn?
I'm not going to repeat anything, but Councilor Brox, that's what I've always, when we met with the planning committee council with the developer on this, you can say property value. I've seen that before, but we can't get anybody to explain to us how we come up with that number of what my property value is worth with everything around it. If we had that equation that is told to us, that it's an equation, then I could live on my property value is going to drop because of that. That developer came to us and said this place has been for sale in 20 years and one person has shown interest in it. That's not, we needed to do something down there, and that's why we met on this, but traffic was, and John talked about that, traffic was important to me, making sure it was the right traffic. But the thing that kind of, as we've been working on this life cycle housing, as our population ages, the thing that really made me kind of convinced that this is we need to provide a place for the people that need this service. And the reason I was bringing up the commercial side of it, I think that's a commercial business myself. I don't think it should be in a industrial area. I think it's great to be in a mixed-use area, because I think that's the right thing we should do for residents that are going to choose, hopefully to stay in Hastings or even move to Hastings to use this service. So I'm in favor of it, but it's us as residents, we need to keep supporting all the mixed-use businesses that are around it. Terry's Hardware has been a staple around here, and we need to make sure that we continue to use that and highlight it, that people get in there and use it. So I think it's going to help that area personally. I don't think it's going to bring it down. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Vaughn. Any other discussion, council? Okay, we have several related action items here. Let's see if we can do them as a single motion. I would accept a motion approving a resolution of the City Council of the City of Hastings amending the City of Hastings 2040 Comprehensive Plan. B, an ordinance of the City of Hastings, Minnesota, amending Section 155.01 zoning code of the city code having to do with official zoning map. C, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Hastings granting preliminary and final plat approval of Sweet Living of Hastings addition. And D, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Hastings granting site plan approval of Sweet Living of Hastings. Councilmember Fox and Councilmember Liefeld. Additional discussion, council. All those in favor of the motion state by saying aye. Aye. Opposed to that motion state by saying nay. And that motion prevails.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you. So tonight, under administration, we have the second reading to adopt the ordinance changing the mayor and city council wages. And for this item, we have our city administrator, Dan Waticha.
Thank you, Mayor. This goes back to budget discussions a year ago, and back in December, the council talked about including council wages, which had not been changed, I think, in 7 or 8 years, as part of the compensation study. That report came back this summer, indicated about an $800 increase in mayor and $500 increase in city council member wages to be in line with comparable to neighboring cities of similar size. At our council meeting 2 weeks ago, council had a lot of discussion on much of the proposed ordinance. One of the key pieces that came out of that council discussion 2 weeks ago, the first reading, was an effective date of 2 years from now, so January 2025. And I know that at least a couple of council members in the intervening weeks have inquired about changing that date, shortening it up. That's certainly before you this evening. But the ordinance as written, second reading, currently says January 2025. Any questions? I can certainly take those. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Questions, council? No questions? Okay. Councilmember Fulch? You're looking, okay.
Your Honor, I'm sorry, the packet, when I downloaded it, it says the second reading here, but it was just, the cover letter that would normally go with it wasn't attached and such, and so I just was looking for clarification that, on next steps with this at this point.
If council is ready for second reading and adoption of the ordinance as written, based on the conversations at the last council meeting, you could act on it this evening. Alternatively, if there were some minor amendments to it, you could certainly make those this evening and also adopt it. If council alternatively were interested in more significant changes to it, that might mean sort of a back to the drawing board, let's have first reading and second reading. But you have an ordinance before you consistent with the conversation on September 19th. And if council had thoughts on minor amendments such as changing an effective date, you could do that this evening.
Thank you, Dan. Councilmember Fulch.
Thank you for Thank you for the clarification on that. And so, I continue to think that it should be up to the individual council members as to whether or not they want to take a device that's issued by the city, or if they would rather take the $400 stipend. The more I got to thinking about it, it's like a laptop that has Word on it is much more than $400. And then not to mention, then the IT department having to take care of it, security updates, software updates that would be needed to be done to it and such. And so I think that it would be much more costly to have the city be issuing, devices to every individual council member. And so I think that it should be up to an individual as to whether or not they want to have a city-issued device. The reason that we didn't originally make that decision, just to remind folks, and we did have a lot of conversation about this when we first made this move, and it was because that city-issued devices, they are subject to data practices requests. Any information that is or work that is done on that device is property of the city, and in strict, conformance with that, it would only be, you'd essentially only be able to use it for reading email or writing, correspondences in Word. And if you had to, send a letter or something to that, effect on it. And so it just seems like it's overkill to be issuing a full device to council members and in that capacity. And so I think that it makes a lot of sense to have just gone with the $400 stipend, or if an individual wanted to take a device from the city because they don't feel that they're able to manage having, a device by themselves. And so I think that this should be amended. It went so quickly. I think that we had a lot of conversation last time, and then all of a sudden this came forward as it did, not to mention pushing off the change in the salary until 2025. That would make it 9 years before there was an adjustment in the council wages, and it's only a $500 increase, which isn't much, but that just seems excessive. I mean, what else goes 9 years without an adjustment? Does anything stay the same price, or people have wages that stay the same for 9 years? And so it just, I don't know. I think that sometimes leadership takes courage to, to make tougher decisions. And I'm not afraid of taking a vote on something that I think is fair. And particularly after we had the conversation about how, sometimes people do need, the additional funds to make it so that they can actually participate in being on the city council. And so I think that there is a lot of validity to amending, as this is presented, particularly for under paragraph 5, that the salaries in effect on this date and this ordinance were adopted shall remain in place until after the regular council meeting held on January 6, 2025. I think that we should to amend that to be 2023 and allow for that salary adjustment, to happen. Again, that's 7 years that the salaries had been left as they were. And so I think any reasonable individual would look at that and say to themselves, yeah, after 7 years, that makes sense to make an adjustment to a stipend that anybody would make, whether or not they're, an elected official. And so I'm gonna make a motion to amend the ordinance as it is presented to be updated, changing the date from January 6th, 2025 to January 6th of 2023.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Fulch. Councilmember Liefeld.
I would like to confirm the date of that, the January date. Is that accurate?
If that's what's in the packet. It's on like page 85
It
of
won't be
the
the same in
packet.
'23, it was in '25.
I'm sorry,
The date wouldn't be the same in '23 as it was in '25.
Oh, I see what you're saying, got it. Whatever that, would it be a Monday or something like that, or?
It would be actually the 3rd of January 2023 is the first council meeting of the new year. Because the holiday is actually on Monday. It's the 2nd, but actually we have council on Tuesday.
So then, I would make, you said, Mayor, you said January 3rd, right?
Correct.
Okay, so I would make an amendment then to clarify that, that the date be changed to January 3rd of 2023.
So
the
I'll second that, Your Honor.
And a second by Councilmember Liefeld. Additional discussion, council. Councilmember Lund. Yes, Councilmember Lund.
Thank you. I know I probably made this much too long of a conversation last time, but I'll just take the opportunity to say that I don't think it's a leadership taking an act of courage per se, but it's doing what's appropriate, and I think it's more appropriate to make a change like this when it's not directly affecting you for sure. And additionally, I do believe it's more appropriate for a council to be leveraging city devices rather than receiving stipends to purchase their own. If the reason for that is so that you can't, go on Facebook and things like, that's not what the thing is for. It's to send emails, and it's to use Word and write letters to constituents and receive things and whatnot that are pertinent to this job. It's a tool of the job. So I'll leave it at that. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Councilmember Lund. Councilmember Liefeld.
Point of clarification, since both council members have brought this up, this ordinance does not comment or have any clarification on the devices, is that correct?
Correct.
Correct, it's not in there.
Okay, and then council
Your
member,
motion does.
no, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. Okay.
No. So I just want to clarify, because what Councilmember Lund is saying is, and we've talked about these dates a lot, and the reality is, in January of 2025, there could reasonably still be 4 of us here, including the mayor.
Right.
We don't know that. Because that's the 4 wards and the mayor. So we don't have any guarantee. The only 2 we know won't be here, unless they decide to come back in 2025, is Councilmember Vaughn and Councilmember Brock. So, thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Council. There is a motion on the floor. Councilmember Vaughn.
I was ready to accept it as the way it was written. And again, I've said this before, we don't do it for the money, in my opinion. I think it's used for expenses to go. But what I liked about it is, at first, the reason I questioned it is because we did a snapshot. We went and did a study. We were right there in the ballpark. We actually raised it up a little bit. That's why I'm like, I can support this in 2025. We're probably going to be right in there, probably maybe on a little low end, but I hope we're doing another study by this time to make sure our staff is getting taken care of. I can't support moving the date. I support what was in front of us, but I'm sorry, Councilmember Fulch, I can't support the amendment to it. Thank you.
Any addition? Did you have something else, Councilmember Fulch?
No, I'm sorry, Your Honor, I just, continue to think that 7 years and not making any adjustment, and then if you go into 2025, 9 years without making an adjustment, really? That just doesn't seem reasonable at all, and it's not about, you know, whether or not people deserve it or anything of the matter. I mean, it's just practicality. And, you know, and I think it's not practical either that the city is going to make the investment in the next 2 years to have a full-fledged salary survey done again, you know, to make sure that compensation levels are adequate. And so, I mean, it could very well be another decade before that's done. And so I just think that it makes sense that the council, that the wages don't go another decade. I mean, I don't get it. I just don't get it at all, as to, you know, why it is that we would hold ourselves to a different standard than any other position, any place within this entire city, where it is that you would go nearly a decade without having a small increase made, you know, to a compensation package. And so, I think so anyhow, that's enough. I'll stop with my
Thank you, Councilmember Fulch. Councilmember
comments.
Lightfoot.
Thanks.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just want to clarify too, for those who didn't listen to our last meeting where we had a lot of conversation about this, and Councilmember Vaughn brought up a really good point that none of us ran for the money. But that being said, it could, I mean, it's $500. $500 could mean a lot to someone, and I think it may make it easier for some to want to run. There is a lot of cost involved. There's daycare for meetings for a lot of people. My kids are now older, I don't have to deal with that. But there's a lot of cost to doing this job, taking time off of work to go to events and whatever it may be. So I do think that we do need to think about the fact that even though you don't do it for the money, I think you might open up the door to other people that are looking at it going, oh God, no, I'm not doing this. I know how many phone calls they take. I know how many emails they take. I know how many meetings there are. It might broaden that for us. So I support Councilmember Fulch's idea to, you know, hopefully we can broaden the pool. We want people to participate, and this might just help that. So thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Councilmember Lightfoot. Councilmember Vaughn.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry. I just noticed that I seen wage versus stipend. I think the memo's written wrong, or the headline, because we don't receive a wage, we receive a stipend. And I think it's important that we're not raising wages here, we're raising the stipend.
Stipend. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Vaughn. There is a motion, there is a second. Additional discussion? Councilmember Brox.
I do want to say something about the word reasonable person and just how that gets thrown around. The standard of a reasonable person in law is interesting because basically what it means is a reasonable person is a person in the same situation who would approach the situation with an appropriate amount of caution and also common sense. So I think what's fair here is a matter of opinion. I don't think that if I agree with the date in 2023 or I agree with the date in 2025, that doesn't make me any more or less reasonable. I think we're all trying to be reasonable and fair. So I just want to say, I think we all have the same value in being reasonable and fair. But in the reasonable person standard in law, reasonable people can disagree. So I think it's okay that we disagree about the implementation date. We're still all trying to be reasonable and fair. And I think for me, that's the bottom line.
Thank you, Councilmember Brox. Okay, if no other discussion, all those in favor of the motion on the table, state by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed to that motion, state by saying nay.
Nay.
So, Clerk Murtaugh, could you call the? Councilmember Vaughn.
Nay.
Councilmember Fulch.
Yes.
Councilmember Fox.
Yes.
Councilmember Liefeld.
Yes.
Councilmember Lund.
Nay.
Councilmember Brox.
Nay.
Mayor, sorry, Mayor Fassbender. Yes. And that motion prevails. Next, we have 2023 budget
All you did was the amendment, you still need to do the ordinance.
sorry. That was on the ordinance. Yeah, that was the ordinance.
Yeah, her motion was to modify the ordinance. Yep. Okay.
That's not,
Your Honor, I misunderstood, I guess, the motion. I was under the impression that Councilmember Foch was amending the ordinance and recommending it for final reading. But right, but she was amending what was written in front of you. So, I mean, I guess you could, just for clarification purposes, take another vote. I presume it would be the same. So if council is comfortable that you just passed this ordinance, you don't need to revote.
okay. And we're comfortable, okay? Thank you. Thank you. All right, now we have the 2023 budget pre-authorization purchases. Dan?
Thank you. These are real. A year ago, when we had the preliminary budget for this year, 2022, we recognized that there were a variety of supply chain, primarily deadlines, but just a matter of, in order to get some equipment and vehicles in particular, we would need to order them early. And there are significant items that we ordered a year ago that we're still waiting on. And some of it may be certainly certain things that we received, but some of it even is questionable if we'll get it yet in '22. The economy's still difficult and still has long lead times and also very short windows to order some items. And we've been told that even if you get your name in that small 3-day window and onto the list is not a guarantee of getting that truck or whatever that item is. So recognizing that, the staff looked at capital items that were in the preliminary budget that was approved in early September, recognize it's preliminary, but came up with a list of here are items that we would like to try to purchase or try to order, at least get on the list, depending on what each individual item is, because they're needed for tools to do the job. And hope that ordering them now, they may be available during '23. The items specifically are in the memo, and I can discuss any one that you might have questions to. I would also point out that do not believe that any of the items would require money down in 2022. We actually wouldn't make payment until next year. The other item is B, recognizing that the total cost of these, a little over $900,000, is potentially money that we have cash on hand. It's not relying on the tax levy that you're voting in December. It's not relying on receiving local government aid next July. So if there were concerns about procedurally we're doing this too early, I get it. It's because of some real practical difficulties. But if push came to shove, there is cash that could accomplish them. I think that's worth noting. With that, I can discuss any or all of the items, the budget process itself, but that's the recommendation to authorize staff to begin the process at ordering these items. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Any discussion, council? Councilmember Lund.
So, thank you, Your Honor. So, Dan, none of this is realized, none of the expense is realized until delivery is received, is that correct? Is that what you're saying? It's not?
None of it is expected to be realized. I realize I'm equivocating a little bit there. Do not expect any of it to need anything, but it's possible that as we try to find some opportunity to purchase a truck that's just not available, that vendor might say money down. But everything we've seen previously or conversations we've had have not required any sort of money down. It'd be payment upon actual delivery.
Any other questions, council? Okay, if not, I would accept a motion to approve staff to begin the purchase processes for several 2023 budget items as presented in the memo. Councilmember Fulch and Councilmember Fox, second. Additional or new discussion, council? Okay, all those in favor of the motion state by saying aye. Aye. Oppose that motion, state by saying nay. And that motion prevails. Thank you, Dan. Council, any announcements or updates? Okay, I have a couple. October is National Community Planning Month. Extra appreciation to Community Development Director John Hinsman and his team. Thank you, John. Pause in the Park is Thursday, October 6th at Rivertown Dog Park. Thursday, October 6th to Sunday, October 9th, a storybook will be along the trail at Vermillion Falls Park, a partnership with Pleasant Hill Library. The Friends of Pleasant Hill Library is hosting a used book sale Thursday, October 6th to Sunday, October 9th. In recognition of National Fire Prevention Week, the Fire and EMS Department Open House is Tuesday, October 11th. Meet the department, learn about fire safety, and see the new fire engine. All ages are welcome. City Hall will be closed from 10:30 to 1:30 tomorrow, October 4th. Meetings coming, Monday, October 10th, 7 p.m. Planning Commission. Tuesday, October 11th, 7 p.m. Parks and Recreation Commission. Wednesday, October 12th, 6:15 p.m. Arts Task Force. Thursday, October 13th, 6:30 p.m. Hedra. Monday, October 17th, 7 p.m. City Council regular meeting. I would accept a motion for adjournment.
So moved, Your Honor.
Councilmember Liefeld and Councilmember Vaughn. No discussion. All those in favor of the motion state by saying aye. Aye. Opposed to that motion state by saying nay. Okay, we are adjourned.